The gym of Riverside Elementary pulsed with laughter, music, and tiny dresses spinning under twinkling lights. But in the shadows, one man wasn't celebrating, he was working. Daniel Harris, a single dad and janitor, gripped his mop like it was a lifeline. While every father twirled his daughter to the beat of the music, Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead and emptied trash bins. It wasn't supposed to hurt this much, but it did. His own little girl, Emma, wasn't out there dancing in a sparkling dress. She was at home, probably asking her aunt why Daddy always worked nights. Daniel had promised her a birthday party, balloons, cake, the works. That's why he'd said yes to another overtime shift. That's why he swallowed his pride while other fathers basked in the glow of fatherhood. Every laugh, every squeal, every proud cheer from the dance floor was like a knife twisting deeper in his chest. He had traded memories for money, and the cost weighed heavy on him tonight. Standing by his mop bucket, Daniel watched a dozen dads become heroes in their daughters' eyes, and wondered if Emma would ever see him that way. He told himself he didn't mind. He told himself he was doing it for her. But deep down, as the music swelled and little girls spun in their father's arms, Daniel Harris felt the crushing truth. His daughter was missing the one night every girl remembers, and he was powerless to change it. Daniel Harris turned away from the dance floor, forcing himself to focus on the mop in his hands. He told himself not to look again, not to torture himself watching what he couldn't give Emma. But just as he wheeled his bucket toward the supply closet, a small voice sliced through the music, cutting into his heart like a blade. "Excuse me, sir?" Daniel froze. The voice was soft, almost hesitant, like a secret afraid of being spoken too loud. He turned. There, near the edge of the room, sat a little girl in a wheelchair. Her dark hair spilled over her shoulders, tied loosely with a pink ribbon that shimmered in the glow of string lights. A stuffed bunny lay on her lap, its ears worn from love. Her name tag read simply, Grace. For a moment, Daniel just stared. She looked fragile, smaller than the other girls, but her eyes, big, brown, uncertain, held him in place. "Hi," she whispered, almost too shy to meet his gaze. "You're the janitor, right?" Daniel blinked, then managed a smile. "Yeah, that's me, Daniel. And you must be Grace," she nodded, clutching her bunny tighter. The music swelled around them, but her voice trembled through the noise. I don't have anyone to dance with," she said. "My dad didn't come." The words were simple, but the weight behind them crushed Daniel. He felt it in his chest, that same ache he knew from Emma's disappointed sighs when he missed bedtime stories. He looked at Grace, at the way she tried to stay brave, holding back tears no 7-year-old should ever have to swallow. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly. He crouched down to meet her at eye level, ignoring the squeak of his knees on the polished gym floor. "That must hurt." Grace shrugged, but her lip quivered. "It's okay. I'm used to it." Those words shattered him more than any complaint could have. No child should ever be used to being left behind. Daniel's throat tightened, and for a moment he had no idea what to say. Then Grace lifted her chin. Her eyes, timid yet desperate, locked on his. "Would you dance with me?" The question stunned him. He glanced down at himself. Scuffed work boots, faded coveralls stained with bleach, hands rough and raw from scrubbing. He wasn't a father here tonight. He wasn't a guest. He was the janitor. "I don't know if I'm the right guy," he began, but she cut him off with a single word, whispered like a prayer. "Please." Daniel's heart nearly broke in two. Around them, fathers spun their daughters, cameras flashed, laughter spilled like champagne. He thought of Emma again, alone at home, missing her own dance. And here, right in front of him, was another little girl waiting, hoping, begging not to be invisible. He set his mop aside, wiped his palms on a towel, took a breath. Then he gave her the smallest smile. "All right, Grace," he said. "Just one song." Her face lit up instantly, brighter than the string lights above. Daniel took her tiny hand gently, careful not to overwhelm her fragile frame. He wasn't sure how to dance with someone in a wheelchair, but he didn't care. He just followed the rhythm of the song, swaying side to side, guiding her chair in slow circles across the floor. At first, he worried people might laugh, but the second Grace giggled, high, pure, like bells ringing, every doubt vanished. She wasn't thinking about who wasn't there. She wasn't thinking about her absent father. She was thinking about the moment, about being seen. Her laughter cut through the music and filled the entire gym. Heads turned. Some parents smiled warmly. Others whispered, surprised. But Grace didn't notice, and Daniel didn't care. For those 3 minutes, it was just the two of them, the janitor and the girl in the chair, carving out their own kind of magic. When the song ended, Grace beamed up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel's voice caught in his throat, but he managed to answer. "No, Grace, thank you." Because in that moment, Daniel realized something. He had come here tonight feeling like a failure, convinced he could never give Emma the joy other fathers gave their daughters. But in the span of one dance, Grace had reminded him that love isn't measured in gifts or grand gestures. It's in showing up, in being present, in seeing the child who feels unseen. And as Daniel gently released her hand, he had no idea that someone else had been watching, someone powerful, someone who would change both his life and Emma's forever. "Just one song, please?" Grace's voice was trembling, fragile but stubborn, a thread of hope dangling in a room full of polished shoes and glittering dresses. Daniel Harris stood frozen, staring at her. The mop still dripped dirty water beside him, his coveralls reeking faintly of bleach, his boots scuffed from years of labor. Everything about him screamed that he didn't belong here, not in this moment, not under these lights. But Grace's eyes, wide, pleading, shimmering with the kind of longing only a child can hold, pinned him to the spot. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought about running, just slipping back into the supply closet, hiding behind the safety of his work. But then he remembered Emma, at home in her pajamas, waiting for a dad who worked too much. The guilt in his chest twisted like a blade. He sighed, let the mop handle fall with a dull clatter, and knelt down so Grace could see the smallest smile tugging at the corners of his weary face. "All right," he whispered. "Just one song." Grace gasped, her entire face lighting up like the gym string lights had suddenly come alive inside her. She extended a tiny hand, trembling, fragile but determined. Daniel wiped his palms quickly on his towel before he took it. His hand swallowed hers, rough and calloused, but he held on as gently as he could. The DJ shifted into a slow melody. Parents swayed with daughters, skirts spun in circles, laughter rose like champagne bubbles. And then, almost unnoticed at first, Daniel began to move with Grace. He wasn't sure how to dance with a wheelchair. He wasn't sure of anything, but he started with what he knew. Rhythm. One step left, one step right. A careful turn of her chair, and suddenly the two of them were moving, not awkwardly, but in sync, like the music had been written for them. Grace's eyes widened in wonder. Then, like sunlight bursting through clouds, she laughed. The sound cracked through the noise of the gymnasium. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't forced. It was pure, wild, unrestrained joy. The kind of laugh that spills out of a child when she finally feels seen. And it stopped people cold. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A few girls tugged on their father's sleeves, pointing at the janitor in coveralls, spinning a little girl in a wheelchair. Some parents smiled. Some whispered. A couple frowned, but none of that mattered. Because Grace was laughing, Daniel felt it reverberate through him. That laugh. Every ounce of exhaustion, every night of scrubbing floors until his back screamed, every lonely evening Emma spent waiting for him. It all melted in that sound. For once, he wasn't the invisible janitor. He wasn't the failure of a dad who couldn't afford better. He was the man making a little girl believe she mattered. He leaned down and whispered, "You're doing amazing, princess." Grace's cheeks flushed. She clutched her bunny tighter but never stopped smiling. "No one ever danced with me like this before," she admitted softly. Daniel swallowed hard. His throat burned. "Then I guess tonight's the first time." The music swelled, and he spun her chair gently, careful not to lose control, guiding her like she was the star of the night, and to him, she was. For those 3 minutes, Daniel Harris forgot the world, forgot his debts, forgot the way people looked down on him. It was just him and Grace, carving their own rhythm in a gym full of fathers and daughters, and the crowd couldn't look away. The whispers grew louder. Someone pulled out a phone, recording. A teacher dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Even the DJ slowed the tempo, sensing something sacred was unfolding. Grace tilted her head back and laughed again, brighter, louder, and the sound lifted the entire room. Daniel caught sight of a woman near the punch table. Unlike the others, she wasn't smiling. She was staring, frozen, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't know that this moment was shattering her heart in the best possible way. But he'd find out soon enough. The song drew to a close. Daniel slowed the chair, giving Grace one final spin before letting the music fade. He released her hand carefully, like she was made of glass, but her grip lingered, unwilling to let go. "Thank you," she breathed, cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling. Daniel tried to answer, but his voice cracked. He nodded instead, blinking hard. Finally, he managed, "No, Grace, thank you." Because for the first time in years, Daniel Harris felt like more than a janitor. He felt like a father worth something. And though he couldn't see it yet, that one dance was about to change everything. His life, Emma's life, and Grace's. At first, it was just whispers, a few curious glances, a couple of smiles, but within seconds, the entire gymnasium had shifted. The fathers who had been twirling their daughters slowed. Mothers stopped their chatter. Even the DJ leaned over his booth, eyes narrowing at the sight on the dance floor. A janitor, in bleach-stained coveralls, dancing with a little girl in a wheelchair. The contrast was startling, almost cinematic, under the twinkling lights. With the music swelling, Daniel Harris didn't look like a man who spent his nights scrubbing toilets and polishing floors. He looked like something else entirely, like a father every child deserved. Grace's laughter was the spark, but it spread like wildfire. Every giggle out of her mouth softened the hearts in that room. Some parents dabbed at their eyes, others recorded on their phones. A teacher whispered, "That's beautiful," her voice catching with tears, but not everyone saw beauty. A cluster of fathers at the back frowned, whispering words Daniel couldn't hear. Some saw him as out of place, a man trespassing on a night reserved for families who belonged. Their narrowed eyes, their stiff shoulders said everything. He shouldn't be here. Daniel didn't notice. His focus was on Grace, her wide smile, the way her tiny hands clung to his. He spun her chair gently, careful but confident, as if she were the only person in the world who mattered. And then, near the punch table, a single woman stood completely still. Her presence was magnetic, though no one dared approach. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her heels clicking against the polished floor when she shifted her stance. Her dark hair framed her face in waves, her jawline sharp, her posture regal, but it was her eyes, piercing, glistening with unshed tears, that betrayed the storm inside. Victoria Reynolds. The name alone carried weight. CEO of Reynolds Global Tech, one of the most powerful women in the city, a billionaire who rarely appeared without a convoy of assistants and cameras. Tonight, though, she had slipped in quietly, unseen. She hadn't wanted to steal the spotlight. She had only come for one reason, to catch a glimpse of her daughter, Grace. Victoria's throat tightened as she watched the janitor spin her little girl across the floor. She had expected to see Grace sitting alone, as usual, watching, waiting, enduring. That's why she came, to be near her daughter without smothering her with the presence of a mother everyone whispered about. But instead, she saw this. A man in scuffed boots and calloused hands kneeling down, making Grace feel like the most important person in the room. Her chest ached. She was a woman who had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, who had stared down boardrooms full of men determined to break her. Yet here she was, undone by the sight of her daughter laughing. A tear slipped before she could stop it. Around her, the murmurs grew louder. Some parents recognized her now, their eyes darting back and forth between the billionaire at the punch table and the janitor on the floor. The irony was staggering. One of the wealthiest women in the state, and the man making her daughter smile wasn't a polished executive, wasn't a family friend from high society. He was the school janitor. Victoria's hands clenched into fists, not from anger, but from the tidal wave of emotion crashing through her. She had spent years building walls around Grace, shielding her from pity, from cruel whispers, from the heavy burden of her last name. But in that moment, she realized something brutal and beautiful. All Grace had ever needed was not protection, not privilege, just someone willing to see her. And this man, this janitor, saw her. The song ended, but the crowd didn't move. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Every eye stayed fixed on the unlikely pair at the center of the room. Grace was glowing. Daniel bowed his head slightly, embarrassed, already reaching for the towel at his belt as if to remind himself of his place. But before he could retreat, the microphone squealed, feedback echoing through the gym. All heads turned. Victoria Reynolds stepped out of the shadows. The sharp click of her heels silenced the whispers instantly. Gasps rippled across the room. Everyone knew her face. They had seen it on magazine covers, news broadcasts, Forbes profiles. To see her here, in person, was like watching a queen descend into a crowded ballroom. And yet her eyes weren't on the crowd. They were locked on one thing only: her daughter. Grace's smile widened when she saw her mother, but her hand still clung to Daniel's. Victoria's lips trembled, but she steadied herself. Lifting the microphone with the composure of someone used to commanding the world's attention, "This," she began, her voice strong but thick with emotion, "is my daughter." The gym fell into a hush so deep you could hear the hum of the lights overhead, and the man who just danced with her. She paused, her eyes glistening as they flicked toward Daniel. He didn't have to. No one asked him to, but he chose to. He saw her when others looked away. And for that, I will never forget him. Daniel's stomach twisted. His face burned. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but Grace's hand tightened on his, anchoring him in place. Victoria took a step forward, heels striking like thunder. "His name," she asked, her gaze piercing him, "is—" Daniel's throat went dry. He managed to croak, "Daniel Harris." The billionaire nodded slowly. A tear finally slipped down her cheek. "Well, Mr. Harris," she said, voice breaking just slightly, "tonight, you reminded me that kindness is more powerful than money, that love is greater than titles, and that sometimes heroes wear coveralls." The crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, even sobs. Phones flashed. Grace clapped her tiny hands, grinning through happy tears. And Daniel Harris stood frozen in the middle of it all, utterly stunned. Because in the eyes of a billionaire and in the heart of a little girl, he was no longer invisible. The microphone crackled again, pulling the room into a silence so sharp it seemed even the music dared not interrupt. Every gaze followed the woman who stepped with measured poise toward the stage, her heels slicing through the hush like blades. Victoria Reynolds. Daniel's stomach dropped. He had seen that face before, on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, on news broadcasts announcing mergers worth more money than he could imagine, but never like this, never standing in the middle of a grade school gymnasium, the smell of popcorn and punch hanging in the air, her presence as commanding as if she were walking into a boardroom of 1,000 men. She took the microphone with steady hands, though her eyes betrayed the storm swirling behind them. She didn't look at the crowd first. She looked at Grace. "That beautiful girl," Victoria began, her voice strong but thick with something raw, "is my daughter." Gasps tore through the gym. Parents clutched at pearls. Teachers whispered furiously. And every set of eyes snapped from Victoria to Grace, then back again. The revelation slammed through the room like an earthquake. Grace flushed pink, but her smile never wavered. She tightened her grip on Daniel's hand. Victoria's gaze shifted, finally locking on Daniel. "And the man standing beside her," she continued, her voice resonant, echoing against the gym walls. Is someone I owe more than applause? Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to let go of Grace's hand, to retreat into the safety of anonymity. But she held tighter, anchoring him. He did not have to dance with her, Victoria said, scanning the stunned faces before her. No one asked him to. He could have stayed in the shadows, invisible, as people like him are too often forced to be. But he chose differently. He chose kindness. The murmurs grew, rippling across the floor. Someone whispered, "Is she defending him?" Another parent muttered, "The janitor?" But Victoria's tone silenced them all. "I have built an empire," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "I have commanded boardrooms, negotiated deals across oceans. And yet," her voice faltered, just briefly, as her eyes shimmered, "and yet none of it compares to what I saw here tonight." Her hand trembled slightly as she gestured toward Grace, a little girl who has waited too many nights for someone to notice her, and a man, this man, who decided she was worth seeing. Daniel swallowed hard, shame and pride colliding in his chest. He could feel every stare burning into him, branding him as something more than just the janitor, but also branding him as exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare. Victoria stepped closer, descending the stage stairs. Her heels echoed with authority, each step deliberate. She stopped only feet away from Daniel and Grace, her gaze unwavering. "What is your name?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. His throat was dry, his palms slick. "Daniel," he finally managed. "Daniel Harris." The crowd seemed to lean in, memorizing the name. Victoria nodded, repeating it like it carried weight. "Mr. Harris, tonight, you reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. True worth has nothing to do with balance sheets, job titles, or bank accounts. It is measured in moments like these, in kindness freely given." The room was spellbound, phones were recording, tears streaming down faces. For once, no one whispered. They just listened. Daniel stood paralyzed, torn between awe and disbelief. He had lived his entire life unseen, the man who swept floors after the lights went out. And now here he was, being honored by one of the most powerful women in the country, in front of everyone. Victoria lowered her voice, almost tender now. "You gave my daughter a night she will never forget. For that, Mr. Harris, I thank you. Not as a CEO, not as someone with wealth or influence, but as a mother." She reached out then, placing a hand lightly on his arm. The gesture was small, but the gym seemed to tremble with its weight. Applause erupted, first scattered, then thunderous. Parents rose to their feet. The DJ forgot the music entirely as the room filled with cheers, claps, and shouts. Grace's laughter rang out again, bright and pure, and Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. In that moment, one truth crystallized inside him. He had not just danced with a little girl, he had stepped, unknowingly, into the center of a story that would rewrite his life forever. The applause still thundered when Victoria Reynolds turned her full attention back to Daniel. The billionaire CEO, the woman who had stared down presidents and prime ministers, softened as she looked at the man in coveralls holding her daughter's hand. "What is your name?" she asked again, though she already knew. "Daniel Harris," he said, voice rough, almost breaking. Victoria repeated it slowly, as though memorizing it. Then she stepped closer, her voice cutting through the roar of the crowd, firm yet trembling with something deeper. "Mr. Harris," she said, "tonight you reminded me, and perhaps everyone here, that true worth has nothing to do with money, status, or titles. It is measured in humanity, in moments of compassion, in seeing someone when others look away." The room hushed again. Daniel's ears rang with the weight of her words. He had never in his life expected to be addressed like this, not in front of a crowd, not by her. Victoria inhaled, then continued, her voice carrying the weight of a vow. "And for that, I owe you more than applause. I owe you gratitude." She turned to Grace, whose little face still glowed like the sun, then back to Daniel, who was struggling to breathe. "I would be honored, Victoria said, the words deliberate, heavy. If you and your daughter, Emma, would join Grace and me for dinner this weekend, not as a charity gesture, not as a publicity stunt, but as a thank you. From one parent to another, the air seemed to vanish from the room. Daniel froze. Did he hear her correctly? Dinner, with a billionaire, with Grace's mother. His throat tightened. He wanted to say no, to refuse, to shrink back into the shadows where he belonged. But Grace squealed before he could form a word. Really? Mom? He can come? And Emma too? Her joy was contagious. Her laughter lifted above the crowd, shattering Daniel's hesitation. He looked down at her, saw the hope burning in her eyes, and something inside him broke wide open. Emma. She would finally be part of something bigger than the lonely nights, bigger than secondhand birthdays. She would sit at a table with people who saw her father not as a janitor, but as a man worth knowing. Daniel's voice cracked when it finally came. Yes, he whispered, then stronger, though his chest shook. Yes, of course. Thank you. Victoria smiled, a real smile, rare, unguarded, almost vulnerable. She nodded once, sealing the moment. Good. Then it settled. The crowd erupted again, but Daniel barely heard it. His knees trembled, his hands shook. But Grace's laughter anchored him. For the first time in years, Daniel Harris wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the man with the mop. He was the man who would sit at the table. And he knew, deep down, that everything had just changed. The music swelled again, filling the gym with laughter, clapping, and flashing lights. The father-daughter dance carried on, but for Daniel Harris, nothing looked the same anymore. He still held the ragged towel in his hand, the smell of bleach clinging to his coveralls, the weight of exhaustion pulling at his bones, but something inside him had shifted, something no mop, no paycheck, no sleepless night could ever touch, because tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He had been seen, by Grace, by Victoria, by every parent who had witnessed the impossible sight of a janitor stepping onto the dance floor and transforming a lonely little girl's night into magic. And Emma, he thought of his daughter, sitting at home, maybe asleep by now. Soon, she would know. Soon, she would see that her father was more than the man who missed bedtimes. He was the man who made a difference. The towel trembled in his grip. His chest ached, not with shame but with hope. Hope that tomorrow could be different. Hope that Emma would look at him the way Grace had, like a hero. Around him, the gym returned to noise and chatter, but Daniel stood still, breathing it in. One dance. Just one. That's all it had taken. A single choice to say yes. And in that choice, two lives, his and Grace's, had collided, intertwining in a way that would ripple far beyond this night. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the truth settle into his bones. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the heaviest weight. Tonight, a janitor became something more, and tomorrow, everything would begin again. Different, brighter, alive. A janitor's kindness changed everything for a lonely girl and her billionaire mother. Don't miss stories like this. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, life-changing moments.